Hi, my name is Claire Humbro, and for my presentation, I decided to look into a little bit about the international conflicts involving the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is also known as the PKK. The situation at hand is that the jihadist group Islamic State and the PKK militants are working together to cause mass havoc throughout countries such as Syria, Iraq, and specifically Turkey. The violence in Turkey specifically escalated after the ceasefire that originally came to rise in March of 2012 ended. Something that is also causing mass havoc in Turkey is how weak their alliances are despite being part of the UN. The PKK is causing mass economic strain, and their attacks are weakening the government and causing the country to crumble even more than it already has been. Since the end of the ceasefire in 2015, the PKK, along with the Islamic State, has organized several terrorist attacks, several bombings throughout Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. The major ones in Turkey occurred in Istanbul recently, one being on December 10th of 2016 at a soccer stadium where 38 people were dead and 155 were wounded. And the second one occurred on New Year's Day of 2017, where 39 people were murdered at the Regina nightclub, which this was an attack that was heard about worldwide. After 3 decades, this party has caused several deaths. It is estimated that approximately 350,000 civilians were murdered, and several cities throughout the Kurdish southeast were destroyed completely. The Turkish government is specifically taking action against the PKK and Islamic State organizations by hiring more military personnel than previously allowed due to funding. The Turkish government is also taking action by jailing the Kurdish representatives in response to the Kurdish movement, which is causing a huge uproar within the PKK because the Kurds believe that this is a huge violation of their fundamental rights as citizens living in Turkey. And many others believe that this is the government's response to what's happening over in Syria and Iraq with how much power that the PKK and Islamic State is gaining. When Module 1 is applied to this topic, it's easy to see that the realism theory is heavily prominent. The states are obviously the most important actors, and Turkey's weak alliances with other international powers, despite being part of the United Nations, is a severe problem for them as a governmental system. When the principles of dominance are applied, we can look at a few separate things. One, the Kurds are competing with Turkey for power within the state, but not only within Turkey, they're also competing in Syria and Iraq, gaining more military power as the wars go on. However, Turkey is also gaining power by jailing the Kurdish representatives and boosting their military numbers. Looking at the realist assumptions, you can look at realist assumption 2 and see that the states are rational actors. Given the role of survival, the states will do whatever is necessary to thrive. For example, the Kurds are resorting to violence in order to boost their power. And then looking at assumption 3, when we look at the world as a dangerous and uncertain place, it is quite true given the number of attacks by the PKK and the Islamic State. When we look at the principle of hegemony, which is the leadership or dominance of one social group over another, basically the battle of strong versus weak. An example we could apply to this would be at the end of the ceasefire, the rise of violence. And this could be seen as the PKK asserting its dominance over Turkey and over Syria and Iraq. When looking at Module 2 and the classification of actors, it's easy to see that Turkey would be classified as a state actor It has its own territory, it is sovereign, has a population, and has its own government. The PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, could be considered maybe a sub-state actor. It is very similar to Al-Qaeda and any other terrorist organization that you would see. When looking at the levels of analysis as applied to the PKK, when you're looking at the individual level, the number of PKK militants is increasing steadily due to the influence of parents and elders in the militant group who have children, and they are showing their children what they are doing and saying, hey, this is what you need to do to show that you are loyal to us. When looking at the domestic level of analysis, almost all of the Kurds in Turkey are part of the PKK in one way or another, whether it's silent or part of the 3,500 active militants that are currently in the PKK. When looking at the interstate level of the levels of analysis, the Turkish government imprisoning the Kurdish representatives and taking away their fundamental rights could be seen as their way of trying to establish control and assert their governmental control over the citizens who are part of the PKK. The global level of analysis can be applied to the UN and how it is working with the states in which the PKK is active, Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and how it's trying to help them find peaceful resolutions with the PKK. An example of this would have been back in 2012 when they helped Turkey and the PKK establish a ceasefire, which came to an abrupt halt in 2015. And applying Module 3 and looking at global intergovernmental organizations such as United Nations, we're again looking at how the UN helped Turkey establish the ceasefire with the PKK back in March of 2013, and how it ended after about 2 years in July of 2015, followed by an uproar and violence. We're going to look at the just war doctrine too, because the current wars in both Syria and Iraq involving the PKK began as wars of aggression, not as wars where the PKK was getting back for aggression brought on to them. The members of the PKK who are captured, as well as the Kurdish reps who are currently imprisoned by the Turkish government, face war crimes because of this. One thing that can be applied to the just war doctrine is the civilian casualties. Over 350,000 civilian casualties were caused by the PKK just in the three decades that it has been present. And lastly, we're going to look at the individual rights. There really aren't any for the current members of the PKK because those fundamental rights are being taken away from the Kurdish citizens as a result of what the PKK is doing. And that concludes my presentation on the involvement of the PKK in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Here are the list of my sources, and thank you for listening.